Hi everybody, thank you for joining us for today's webinar on 6 steps to email creation. We're super excited to present today's content with our partners over at IBM. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Dan Caro. I'm the Director of Marketing Operations here at Whereoware. If you want to interact with me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @dcaro12. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you can send it to me on Twitter. I'll respond when we're done today. If you have any questions that you want to ask during the presentation, you can use the Q&A window to send those over to us, and we'll answer those questions if we have time at the end. If you are tweeting along, make sure to use the hashtag @WowWebinar. That way we can track everybody's questions and comments on the webinar. So if you have a thought, opinion on anything that we're talking about today, and you want to put it up on Twitter, make sure to use that hashtag. And now let me let our partner from IBM today, Tiffany Tooley, introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Tooley. I'm the Worldwide Marketing Leader, Digital Marketing Agencies at IBM. You can see my Twitter handle on the screen at AllAboutTiffany. Feel free to reach out that way and ask any questions, or if you have any follow-up questions after the event, you can reach me there. Or on LinkedIn. You can see my LinkedIn handle up on the screen as well. So just a quick little background about myself. You know, I obviously with IBM, I work with a team of marketing professionals here at IBM that not only market Watson Marketing, that's really tough to say 3 times really quickly, which is a former IBM Marketing Cloud and former Silverpop, but we also use it. So a lot of the things that I'll be talking to you or sharing with you today is not only from my experience marketing our technology, but also using it. We obviously at IBM, recruit with partners and agencies such as Whereoware to help them, best support their brands with the right tools and technologies. And Whereoware has been a long-time partner of IBM, formerly Silverpop. So I'm super thrilled to be here today to support them and talk about email creation.
Great, thanks Tiffany. So let's go ahead and jump in. So if this is your first time listening to a Whereoware webinar, we're Whereoware, we're a digital agency. We've been in business for the last 16 years, and we specialize in the omni-channel user experience. And then just a little more background on me. I'm someone who's been using the current incarnation of IBM Marketing Cloud for the last 10 years. I've been using it when it was Silverpop, when it was vTrends. So I've been using it for a long time and have a lot of experience to share with you all. So a little bit about our customers. We have a lot of amazing clients. Generally speaking, they're B2B and B2C e-commerce and services companies. And right now I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany. She's going to talk a little bit about Watson Marketing.
Sure. So for those of you that don't know, and Dan alluded to some of this, Silverpop has obviously evolved into IBM Marketing Cloud, and recently we, for all intents and purposes, rebranded as Watson Marketing, and of course with that, added some new functionality that we're super excited about. So just at a real high level, when you think about Watson Marketing, obviously it's a suite of technologies and solutions that are really meant to really provide marketing professionals like yourself with the right technologies and the right tools in order to really enhance the experiences for their customers. And that means helping you to be able to tap into new insights from inside and outside your organization, whether it's customer behaviors, patterns, or sentiments, and then being able to use that to fuel new business. And so when you think of Watson Marketing, you can really kind of think about it in 3 buckets or entry points for really wherever you are in your digital marketing journey or sophistication level. It's campaign automation, which obviously includes email, which is our focus for today. There's marketing insights, which is analytics and reports and insights. And then there's real-time personalization, which is personalization that's really driven by cognitive rules engines. And so that's pretty much an overview of the solution, and we'll kind of go in from there and start talking about email.
Thanks, Tiffany. So let's talk about email. So what we're going to talk about today are the 6 steps in your email creation process, and basically what you need to think about as you're going through that email creation process. But before we get started on that, we want to share a couple stats. So this stat is from a 2016 email on asset study, and it says that 71.8% of companies plan on spending more time on email production this year. So basically, like the thought overall, like based on this study, is saying that more time is expected in the production process.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, I think every year you start to hear these studies, especially around the beginning of the year, that email is dead, right? And then you kind of piggyback that or back that up against some stats. And so, for example, I think there were some recent stats that showed that there were 75 million emails sent in 2016, with an expectation for that number to rise to about 90 million in 2020. And I think what that stat clearly points to is the fact that, one, email is not dead, and two, the fact that successful organizations continue to recognize the importance of it. And I mean, you can certainly see this in other studies, like if you've seen recent e-consultancy or marketing Sherpa studies that show that email is the #1 channel for ROI and the #1 channel by which customers prefer to be communicated with. So super important, super critical to your overall success.
And then just another stat from Litmus's 2016 State of Email Production Report. 54.9% of companies have 6 or more emails in production at the same time. And the same report said that most of these companies are spending 3 days or less on each email. So basically, based on the last slide and this slide, you're being asked to be more efficient, produce more, but not make more mistakes. So having said that, what's important here is creating a repeatable email production process. So things that we're going to be doing today are questions that you should be asking yourself as you go through that process, and then also just a step-by-step guide as far as like what you should be doing at each step, and again, those questions that you should be asking yourself. So step 1, define the goal. What are you trying to accomplish? How is it going to be measured? And what is everyone's role going to be in that process? So as far as defining the goal, like a good place to start is, who is your target audience? Do you know ahead of time who you want to be sending to? Who is going to be targeted with your email? So this can be leads, this can be clients, these can be like current members. If you have a subscription service, this can be subscribers, and in some cases, this can even be inactive clients, clients that haven't been interacting with your brand. Next, what is your email's goal? Like, why is this email needed? And what is the business objective that you're trying to satisfy? So a lot of times we talk about value propositions for businesses. I think that every email also has a value proposition.
Yeah, and I think one thing, when you're defining your goals, something else to just consider is that you want to make sure you understand what device your emails are typically read on. It'll not only help you define your clear goals by channel, but it'll also help you make sure you build out your emails appropriately. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about this later.
And then also, what benefit are you going to be offering your users with this email? So I think as you go into every email that you're creating, you need to realize, okay, like, is it one benefit, is it multiple benefits, but there has to be a clear benefit that you're offering your users. And when that email purpose is clear, like, your audience is also going to become clear. So if you're doing this at the same time as trying to establish your target audience, like sometimes, like once you know that purpose, the purpose of your email, you can also make some assumptions about your audience. And then next, what action do you want them to take? Like, what's the next step after the click? Like, before you go into designing or building, that's an area that you should definitely be clear. So how is success measured? Are you going to measure it based on registrations? Are you going to measure it based on revenue? Are you going to measure it based on email signups or signups to your subscription? So those success metrics definitely have to line up with your goal. So once you've established your goal, then it's time to establish your success metrics. And you need to identify that before you ever just start designing or building. And then once you have those success metrics established, you need to decide how, like, success can be quantified. Is it going to be in dollars? Is it going to be in conversions? Is it going to be in new leads? Again, like before you ever start doing anything as far as design and build, make sure to establish your success metrics and know how those are going to be quantified. And again, everything has to be trackable, everything has to be measurable as you go through the process.
Right, and I think it's important to point out, you can certainly design based on, key standards or KPIs, but you can also define your goals based on prior campaign performance. So, whether you're looking at micro-level metrics, I can't say that, that are more campaign related, so open rates, click-through rates, or effective rates or conversions, or if you're looking at more macro-level goals, such as acquisitions or your list churn or unsubscribes or maybe even last engagement date or both. What you really want to do is that you make sure you define those and then think about, I think in addition to that, how your performance could potentially stack up against competitors in your industry. And I think one thing that we've done really well is build out and share an annual benchmark study that many of you may find helpful, and we would certainly be open to sharing a link to that after today's webinar, because what it does is really provide a comparison, year over year in terms of standards in terms of KPIs and metrics at the industry level, so you can look up and see what how individuals in your industry are performing, and that'll in turn help you to determine, whether you're underperforming or in many instances overperforming and doing great. So just something else to consider.
Thanks, Tiffany. So next we're going to look at assigning responsibilities and due dates. And as you can see here, we've got a star-studded cast of email production folks. So first off, you need to assign everybody's role and responsibilities and make it very clear what everybody's role and responsibilities are. Next, you need to establish what time expectations are. So as you can see at the bottom of the screen here, we put on a process chart. So like if you haven't done this already, I'd recommend doing it with your team. You're assigning everybody their task and like the expected amount of time that they should have to complete it. You can do this just in general for your entire email production process, or you can do this for each specific email. But it's good for everyone to know what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and then how much time they're going to have for each one. And then it's also important for there to be some oversight. If I was looking at how this is laid out here, I think the project manager would be the one overseeing everything, making sure that our deadlines are met, making sure that everyone's completing their tasks when they need to. And it's also important that you don't fall behind, because if you fall behind, it's always the last person in the process who's going to be stuck with everybody else's delays. And in this case, that's the checker. And the checker should never be the one who's rushed, because that means like that's the person who's not going to have time to thoroughly check the email, and mistakes are going to be made. So it's really important that everyone stays on schedule throughout the process and meet their timelines and responsibilities.
Yeah, and I would say I can't echo that enough. Having the right resources is just critical. And I think from our perspective, we work with companies of all shapes and sizes. And, what I really, hate to see is an organization have a technology, even if it's ours, without the right resources and skill sets to support it, whether that's in-house or with your agency partner. So having that right mix of planners, technologists, and strategists, and all kind of getting on that same page is really critical to your success.
So we talked about establishing your goals. Now we're going to talk about step 2, which is gathering requirements for your email. So here it's what information do you need to gather to execute the email that you want to execute. So a common case is that someone in your organization comes to you and says, we need to send an email. I'm sure a lot of us have been through this. So I'm sure we'll go on to hear it many more times in the future. So when you hear this, like if you've already established what your goal is or what your goal is going to be for your next email, so let's pretend that in this case our goal is to generate revenue. We're going to say, okay, goals generate revenue, we're going to be running a 25% off promo. So in terms of what needs to be included, what is your critical needs to be included information for this email? What do you need to send that 25% off email? Do you need a promo code? Do you need the products? Do you need supporting copy? Do you need terms and conditions? This is everything that you have to gather up before actually creating a campaign brief or actually designing and building your email. This is another situation where you need to make sure to get your details up front. It causes a lot of issues when last-minute changes or last-minute copywriting comes in. All of that needs to be identified up front, and this is why it's really important that step 2 is actually step 2, and you're gathering these requirements before you actually start designing or building anything. And then next, what is your call to action going to be? So what do you want your audience to do? So always be very specific. In this case, we set the call to action to be shop the sale. But depending on your email, it could be something like sign up for the webinar, set up your call with a sales agent, last chance to receive a discount. Make sure that it's very clear where the user is going to go next. And then next, do you have the data you need to send the email? Do you have the list? Do you have any data or any fields that you need for personalization? If you're using relational table content, like purchase history or browsing history, is all of that already in your marketing database? If you don't have that data, is that data that you can retrieve yourself, or is that data that someone else is going to need to go get? So are you going to have to go down the hall and ask your IT or data team to go get that data for you? And then where are you linking the CTA? Is that a page that's already been built? So if it's a page on your website, has someone already built that page? Is it a page that still needs to be built? And is it a page that you can build yourself or your team can build, or are you going to have to go down the hall again and ask your developers to build it for you? So what you're looking for here is consistency. So first off, we're looking at the data file here in front of us with item numbers and UPC codes and prices and discounts. So first off, you need to check is the data file correct, like have someone spot check it, have someone make sure that the data, if you're using personalization, that the data that you're going to be putting in is the correct data. And then secondly, for the call to action, is there consistency in the call to action? If we're talking about a 25% off promo or a sale, that promo or sale is taking those users to the sale or promo landing page. And then secondly, are those users going to recognize like where you're taking them? Like if they click on the call to action, is this where they're expecting to be dropped off? And does the whole process make sense to them? Next, we're going to talk about, do you have the images that you need? So the process of acquiring good photography starts well before the email process. Like rarely are you in a situation where you can put that together quickly. And I know that a lot of email marketers lean on stock photography. If it can be your own photography, that's even better because your own images are always going to capture more attention than stock photography. And if you're an email marketer that knows that you already have bad quality photography, you know that that's not something that you already have in your arsenal, it might be time to seek out a professional photographer to do some retakes or do some new photography because it really makes a difference. Like this is one area of email production where quality makes a huge difference as far as being attention grabbing. Next, who is the email coming from? Like what are your from and reply to names? And have you thought of a subject line yet? Sorry about that, folks. So is this going to be your standard from, or are you going to try something different? So I know a lot of email marketers out there, they're not even thinking about the from address. They're like, so in this case, it's mud pie. And like you can go through the rest of your life just sending out every email with mud pie as your from address. But this is actually a great opportunity for you to try something different. If it's always been mud pie, you might want to try mud pie customer service. or actually have that email sent from a specific person within customer service. Because when you send the same from over and over and over again, it can create email fatigue. And so people start just disregarding your emails because they all look the same. When sometimes when you try something different, you can see a lift. And that's something that's pretty easy to test, so it might be time to test your from address. Second, your subject line. Again, is this something you're going to test, or is it not something you're going to test? And if it is something you're going to test, like, what are your different variations? Something that I like to do, and something that I've realized over the years, is I tend to use a similar style of subject line over and over and over again, and when I have to create 4 different variations, those 4 variations tend to be really similar, or like the 4 same type of variations every time. So what I do is I ask my colleagues, I was like, if you were sending this email, like, what subject lines would you use? And you'd actually be shocked. Like, people think about subject lines in a variety of different ways, and if you really want to have great tests, like, ask different people what they think would be good subject lines and throw them in. So just to recap, step 2, gathering requirements. Make sure you know what your need to include information is. Make sure you know what the call to action is going to be. Do you have all the data you need to send that email? Do you already know where you're linking your call to action? Do you have all the images you need up front, and are your images high quality images? And then finally, do you know who the email is going to come from? Is it time to test your from? And have you thought up a subject line, or if you're doing subject line testing, have you thought of a variety of subject lines? So now we're going to jump into step 3. And this is actually my favorite step of the 6 steps we're going to be talking about today. It's where you take a step back and you ask yourself, how can I take this email from being good to great? And I feel like this is a step that's frequently skipped by email marketers. I think a lot of email marketers, and like I definitely take the blame for this sometimes, are just like, okay, this email's good, this is fine, we can get this out, but nobody ever takes a step back and says, okay, how can we take this email from good to great? So a couple things we're going to look at here. We're going to look at what is your company voice? Does your email sound human? And then what type of personalization are you putting into your emails? So first off, how can you make your email more personal? How do you make it sound like your company voice? And a lot of us out there, some of us don't know what our company voice is, and if you don't know what it is, it's good to try to find it. I think it's something that's hard to establish, but even if you don't really know what your company voice is, at the very least, make it sound human. If you're sending this email, like, don't make it sound like you're a marketing robot or a marketing computer. Like, you're humans on the back end of this, so make sure that you're speaking to people like people. And whether it's B2B or B2C, at the end of the day, everybody on the other side of that computer is human too. So make sure to use just general, casual, human language to communicate with them. And then if you're going to use personalization, how are you going to use personalization? Are you going to use it in the form of text? Are you going to use it in the form of images? And if you are using personalization, can your users tell that it's being personalized to them? I know I've seen too many emails that have great personalization, but that personalization gets pushed to the very bottom of the email. So if someone's opening on mobile, they're probably not going to scroll all the way down to see it. So if you are including it, make sure to make it front and center. And have you segmented your audience? Segmentation, is that going to occur one time, or is it going to be an ongoing segmentation? And if you are segmenting, is there a way for you to segment further? So one thing that I've been saying here within the walls of Whereoware is it's 2017. Batch and blast doesn't exist anymore. Like, none of us should be batch and blasting anymore. And so here's a concept that I really want to get across today. So I know that sometimes email marketers and management teams think that email is a numbers game. The more you send, the bigger the results are going to be. And I tend to disagree with that. The more targeted you can make your emails, the better the results are going to be. And your email performance is going to improve. So even though the numbers may look smaller, your results are going to improve and be bigger. And that is not something that you can ever prove without actually testing it and doing it and showing your management teams that that's actually the case. So if you've never done that, I would encourage you to do that, and you're definitely going to see some good results from it.
So a couple other things to think about when you think about personalization and segmentation. In terms of personalization, I think one of the things that you want to really think about is how you're using the data in your database to enhance personalization beyond just name or name and company. And I think Dan spoke to some of that. It might be text, it might be images, it might be product recommendations, right? I think it's really important to consider how and why your personalization rules are defined, right? So they can be based on prior purchase, they can be more transactional in nature, they can be used to support personalized notifications and reminders. But I think what's important is that really defining these rules and how and when you'll personalize your communications beforehand, will ultimately help you net better results from your communications in the long run. And I think secondarily, when we're thinking about segmentation, it's also important to think about what type of data you're using to power your segmentation. So there's tons of technologies out there that enable you to segment based on demographic data, whether might be online or and offline data, within your automation system, and then even behaviors that come from third-party systems. I think it's important to think about the power that you'll have to be able to kind of build out these really laser-sharp segments and messaging, using this kind of more advanced level segmentation, and then being able to determine inclusion into a specific campaign in which you're looking at, behaviors maybe like last purchase or store visit or mobile app use or social behavior, all of these great behaviors that you can use, that will in turn help you really shape out and further customize and further personalize your communications.
Thanks, Tiffany, for that. So now we're going to look at behavioral triggers. So again, we were talking about where you're going to do a one-time segmentation, where you're going to do ongoing segmentation. First off, you need to establish, is an automated trigger or a behavioral trigger necessary? And if it is, what is that trigger going to be? Is it going to trigger based on a sign-up? Is it going to trigger based on an order, a registration, a sign-in? And just as important as someone performing an action, it can be just as important for a user not to take an action. So if you're thinking about an abandoned cart campaign, when somebody puts items into their cart but does not complete checkout, they are not putting in an order. So that's an example of that. Someone did not complete that action. That's a simple example that we all think about, but if you're thinking about any other triggers that you have, are you creating automated programs for those individuals who are not taking those actions? And sometimes those actions not taken can be equally as effective as looking at actions that are taken.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think it's very similar, to that old saying, actions speak louder than words, right? And conversely, a lack of action as well. It's really what your customers do or don't do is far more important, oftentimes, than what they're telling you, right? So to Dan's point, it's super important to include those, or consider including those behavioral triggers in your campaigns.
So we got a question in that asks, what is a behavioral trigger? What is an example of it? So just to be very clear about this, if somebody signs up on your website, that's a behavioral trigger that you can trigger an email based on. If somebody places an order, that's a behavioral trigger that you can execute an email on. If somebody registers for access to your site or subscribes to your site, that's an action. So it's any action that somebody takes on the web that you can then have a trigger to respond to. So next question is your landing page personalized too? Do users know where they're going to go after they click on your call to action? And does the personalization on this landing page match any personalization that you're using in your email? One of the most important questions here is this something that you can even do within your current web platform? If it's not something that you can do within your current web platform, you might want to think about actually taking your users to an IBM Marketing Cloud landing page that has all of these personalization features, and it might make the experience a little better because you're able to match any personalization on your email to personalization on the landing page, and it definitely makes the experience stand out. But the point here is if you're using personalization, make sure that that experience matches. And don't take somebody from like a really great personalized experience to a non-personalized, what we email marketers would call a batch and blast experience on your website. And then having talked about personalization on the landing page, what personalization are you going to put in your email? Do you have relational table content? Do you have purchase history? Do you have browse items? Or even do you have live content? Like, is there a way for you to use live content features to make content in your email adapt to live changes that occur on your website? So here in this example, we've got our 25% off promo email. And at the bottom, we picked just 2 generic images that we wanted to include in the email. So when we're talking about how do we take this email from good to great, what would happen here if we change those images and we swap them out with items that those users had browsed already? So as you can see, it makes the experience more personalized. If you're receiving this email, you're receiving those 2 items because those are 2 items that you've browsed on the website before, and they fall into the sale category. So as you can see, like, this email immediately becomes a lot more relevant to you because you're seeing items that you recognize. And personalized content almost always performs better than non-personalized content. And now I'm going to pass it back to Tiffany to talk about ways to improve your results using content.
Yeah, so I just, real quick, I think just something else to think about is, when you're looking at or considering, how do you improve your results with content? Some of that is really asking yourself, are you delivering the right content for your audience, at the right time? And so certainly, when you think of, best content format, and especially if you're, if you're thinking like a, more B2B related, you have top of funnel content or assets that are more relevant than other assets, right? So when you think kind of top of funnel, that might be your webinars, your tip sheets, right? Those acquisition assets. When you think of, more mid-funnel, that may be where your white papers and your case studies become more relevant. So again, it's just making sure that you kind of build in that emphasis into your overall content strategy. And then if we slide to the next slide, I think piggybacking on this idea of having a well-conceived content plan is scoring, right? And I think it's relevant for both B2B marketers, and also for B2C marketers. I think all of us as marketers know that, not all customers and prospects are created equal, right? I think we can all agree on that. So we use scoring functionality to monitor engagement levels, whether that's location in the buying cycle and readiness to buy, and then being able to, ultimately take that information and deliver highly relevant content at the right step in the customer journey. Or you can use it to assign a numerical value, if you will, that can help you identify how good a fit a prospect is for your product or service and how actively they're currently engaging with your brand. And I think to that point, you have this stat that you see here that says 68% of successful marketers cite lead scoring based on content and engagement as the most responsible factor for improving revenue contribution. And I think what's important to point out is this is relevant whether, like I said, whether you're on the B2B side or whether you're on the B2C side. So, for most of us that are B2B marketers, you get it, right? If you have a clear concept of prospect versus customer or direct sales team, you use a CRM, you kind of mapped out each touch point, right, in your interactions with a prospect or client that brings them from prospect to close, and you know what those, touch points are and those decision factors are, then of course scoring might be right for you. But on the B2C side, if you have engagement or churn that you can measure, if you have an RFM model, recency frequency model in place that you can score against, if you have an onboarding program, you measure customer health, or you have customer advocacy initiatives. These are all good reasons to consider using a scoring model on the B2C side as well.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. And just to back up what Tiffany's saying about content, individuals are going to open and click on your emails based on the content. So if you have great content, you're not going to have to worry about open rates and click rates and conversions. because great content is what drives those type of results. So just keep going through our step-by-step process. Step 4, design. Do you have design that's going to capture your user's attention, and have you thought about mobile in your design process? So first off is your headline attention grabbing. So I know a lot of us do this when we receive emails, particularly if we receive emails on our mobile device. We get an email, we look at it really quickly, like 2 seconds or less, and then we just swipe on to the next email. So I tell a lot of email marketers this: you have 2 seconds to grab their attention. And if the imagery in the email doesn't do it, and if the headline doesn't do it, that's a swipe over to the next email. So you've got very little time to do it. So you got to have great imagery, and you've got to have a great headline. And speaking about great imagery, does the image that you have in the email, does that support the copy? Because it's really important. You can't have one headline with a so-so image that only kind of supports, and it kind of speaks to my point about using stock imagery. When you can have great focused imagery that you've produced, it makes the whole email look a lot better, and it's going to produce better results. And then secondly, does it have a logical thought sequence? As you go through the email, whether you're looking at it on a desktop, on your desktop computer, on a mobile device, like, does it make sense as you're going from top to bottom? And then another thing to consider here, if I'm opening this email on my mobile device, I'm probably only seeing the image, the headline, and a little bit of the text below. So you got to make sure you're taking advantage of that prime real estate. Again, 2-second rule. If you're not taking advantage of that prime real estate, that's going to mean a swipe over to the next email. So just make sure that you're taking advantage of all of those things. Next, who is the email from? Is it instantly recognizable? So in this case, we have an email from Airbnb. Like, clearly most of us know what Airbnb is. Is that recognizable? Like, if you're sending to leads, do they know your company? If you send them an email with your logo and your branding, are they instantly going to be able to recognize that? And then after that, like, where are they going to go to next? Like, is your call to action compelling and specific? Do they know exactly what the next step in the process is? And make sure that it's incredibly obvious. So right now in this example, the call to actions are booked now and filter by hot tubs. And I think Airbnb does a really good job here of making sure you know where you're going next if you click on those 2 links. And then the other thing is just make sure that all of your requirements are included in the email. Like, everything that you gathered up in step 2, did you make sure to include it? Next question, are you designing for mobile users, and are you designing with mobile in mind? You can't design for mobile after the fact, so it's got to be something that you're thinking about before you even go into the design process. Is your design going to be scalable? Is it going to be responsive? And do you have a design plan for either of those situations? So it's something that's critically important. And right now, if you have your design team not thinking about mobile, or they don't have a plan for mobile before they're designing, it might be time to have a conversation with them about what they need to do on their end in order to support a mobile strategy on your end. So now step 5, getting into the building process. And here we're going to talk about, are you building your emails to work for everybody who's going to be receiving them? So first off, are you using live text when possible? So if images are disabled, are your users able to see what you're trying to say with the copy in your email? Are your call to actions bulletproof? Again, images are disabled. Are they going to see what the next step in the process is? And that's even before downloading any images, that they know exactly what your CTA is up front. And we were just talking about designing for mobile. Are you building for mobile? So building for mobile is, so you've already gone through the process of designing for it. Are you coding in responsive? Are you coding a scalable design? Just make sure that the email production folks at the build stage are aware of what they need to do that. And then next, are you using alt text on images? Talking again about having images disabled, making sure that you're using alt text or stylized alt text for them to have a good experience, even if images are turned off, if they're using Outlook, or if they're using another email client that defaults to not having images shown, that is creating a good experience for those users. And then finally, like, have you checked the links on your pre-header, logo, call to action, and images? Are they all linked correctly? And we're going to jump into that point a little bit more as we go on. But here at Whereoware, we have a design and build checklist called the 3 C's, like capture, convince, close. And that's something that we're always looking at, and that's where we talk about alt text and pre-headers and links and building for mobile. So that's something that we're thinking about as we're creating every single email that we create. And again, like, what is the purpose of this? The purpose is to create a great experience for everybody. Whether they're on mobile, whether they have images enabled, disabled, it doesn't matter. Everyone needs to have a great experience. So just talking a little bit more about this, so using live text, I know a lot of us like to play with like great fonts and everything, but like you can still use great fonts by using providers like Google Fonts to do great font tricks, but that doesn't mean that your text can't be live. I see too many emails out there where they're still using text within images. Again, it's 2017. We don't need to be leaning on text and images. You can create live text. And then the bulletproof call to action. Images are disabled. You can still see what the call to action is. And having said that, now I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany, and she's going to talk about knowing what your audience looks like.
Yeah, and so I will say probably some of this kind of harkens back to some of the content shared in the design section. But, you know, I think it's important that with so many devices being used today that, you know, we as marketers understand which devices our communications are being read on. You know, because obviously how you design for desktop is very different than how you design for mobile. We just talked about that, right? So analytics like these are great because at a high level, what they quickly show you is the preferred method of consumption for your open emails, and then give you the ability to kind of drill down to the device or OS level. And then if you really, you know, want to go there, you can even show you the preferred device for each recipient based on their last 10 opens. So what this in turn does is help you to better craft your content based on how it's being consumed. And then moving to the next slide, I think, you know, you've been using preview functionality that shows you, you know, what your message will look like and how it will render across devices, you know, before you build, really, right? While you're still in the design phase, will give you the intel you need to design your content based on the devices your audience are consuming them on. And the great thing here is that you can see all of this before you hit send.
So thank you for that, Tiffany. So talking about building for mobile, just make sure that it's rendering correctly, and Tiffany just showed a couple ways for you to do that. And then you need to make sure that whether your users are interacting on a desktop device or a mobile device, that you have equally good experiences on both. And now Tiffany's going to talk a little bit about adopting best practices to make the mobile experience as good.
Yeah, so just a couple of things, and we talked about a couple of these, but just to reinforce, you know, just some basic best practices for character count when designing for mobile. And so some of these may have changed slightly as, you know, phones get a little bit bigger and better, but they won't have changed that much. So if you're looking here, the from name should be about 25 characters, and, you know, it's really okay if the from name gets cut off. The biggest thing is that people are still able to recognize your brand name. Obviously, if that's a problem, you know, that's no good. So you want to make sure it's recognizable. The subject line should be about 35 characters, and the big thing here is you want to obviously make it interesting, right? It should make them want to open your email. And then finally, the pre-header should be about 85 characters. And this is kind of that first couple of lines of the message that's visible as you're scrolling through or before you open a message. And the biggest thing here is really to make sure that the content is something useful, right? So like here with I think the Pottery Barn example, I can see that they're reaching out to tell me how I can save 30%, right? That's awesome, thanks. Whereas with the Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams email, it says like having trouble viewing their email. I mean, I think a lot of us love them and love their products, but, you know, you don't want this to be the first couple of lines you deliver. That's not compelling, And it'll likely, this is likely an email I'd ignore or delete. And then I think, the other important thing for you to do is to make sure that when you're thinking about designing and building for mobile, is obviously making sure your readers, don't have to pinch or squint. And then in addition, here are some basic examples of specs for body copy, headlines, and buttons that I think are relevant and you might want to, bring into your best practices. So 14 point for body copy, 22 for headline, and then buttons 44 by 44.
And just to jump in on this point that Tiffany makes, so the buttons being 44 by 44, that's the size of the tip of somebody's finger. So that's something that's really going to help with mobile, that you're not making it difficult for somebody to click on a link on mobile. It's something that it's something that's been studied and proven that if it's at least 44 by 44, it's going to be easy for someone to click on. So just jumping into like link checking, so IBM Marketing Cloud has some great features, and one of those great features is actually going through the process of checking your links for you and showing you whether those links are a verified URL, as in like, is that a functional URL? And then as you go through that, that's something that you should be double checking too. I mean, it's great to lean on the IBM Marketing Cloud to make sure that it's functioning, but you should also be going through the process and checking all those links as well, just to make sure that there's a consistent experience and like the experience that you're personally expecting to go through as you go through that email. And then next, as far as building is concerned, did you add your analytics tracking? We talked at the very beginning in goals about identifying your success metrics. The only way to, well, in many cases, the only way to do that is to track your links and track somebody as they're going through the process. So have you added these things in? And analytics should be something that's already integrated into your process. It's not something that you should have to think about in this last step. And one thing that I know that's great about IBM Marketing Cloud is that they have easy and quick ways to add these types of link integrations and analytics tracking into your emails. So if it's something that you're having to think about each time you create an email and manually put links in, you might want to think about looking into ways to automate that process so that all of that analytics is already added in without even having to think about, like, as you go through your build process. So step 6, it's test, test, and test again. Did you find anything wrong? And if you did, have you fixed it? So first off, do your HTML and text versions match? And I've heard some people discuss this and discuss whether the text version is important or not. It definitely still is important, and the reason it's important is because it affects your deliverability. So even if it doesn't match exactly, you need to try to make it match as close as possible, because if the two versions are too far off, you're going to get dinged from a deliverability standpoint. Next, did you check your logic, spelling, and dates? So did you check the logic for people entering your program or the logic that you're putting into a query? Have you double checked your spelling? So here at Whereoware, what we do is we copy and paste out of the email and out of the HTML email and out of the text version and copy that into Word and just do a spell check on it just to catch any errors. And then we also read through it too, but if there's anything that's obvious, it's going to catch that. And then just double check dates. If you're doing a webinar or an event, you don't want your date to be one day off, because that's going to cause some serious issues. So those are critical things to double check. We talked about all the requirements that you gathered in step 2. Have you made sure that you've included all of that information into your email? I mean, I've heard a lot of horror stories about things going wrong with emails, and most of those horror stories involve personalization and having incorrect promo codes. So this is something that I would focus on triple checking when you're adding that in. If it's personalization, sending yourself multiple versions, spot checking the data. And if it's promo codes, like I said, going through the process, go through the process and make sure those promo codes are right before you hit the send button. And then is your contact list and your rules, are those correct? Do you have the correct segmentation? What I do here is I look at the count. And by looking at the count, sometimes that's enough because like normally if the count looks too small or too big, you know that something went wrong. So it's important to make sure that any criteria that you're putting in for that segmentation, that it's delivering a number that looks right to you. And having said that, it's important to spot check the data. If you're using a list for the first time, I would actually just take that list, export it to Excel, and actually walk through and make sure that all of the data looks correct. Make sure that all of the fields line up, that if you're using personalization, that the way that they're displayed looks correct to you. That way you can avoid any errors in the future. And then talking about great things on the IBM Marketing Cloud, like it gives you this final send screen where you can double check a lot of this information as you go through. So in this case, you can check what contact source you selected, how many users are in that count, does that look right to you, what subject line you're using, the mailing that you're using, and just going through the process. And this is at the point at which we here at Whereoware, we actually take a checklist and we go through that checklist as we go through the send screen. And then have you tested across devices and email clients? So I know Tiffany showed a screenshot a couple slides ago about email insights, and we have a slide up here showing Litmus, and I know Email on Acid does this as well. But it's basically a rendering tool showing you how your email is going to display across email clients and mobile devices. And this is important. It's good to know that it's rendering correctly across all of those. But it's also important, like just because you have these tools, you just can't rely on those tools to take care of everything. So it's still important to send it to yourself. If you have an iPhone, send it to yourself on your iPhone. If you have a colleague that has an Android with a Gmail app, send it to them and have them go through the experience. If you have another colleague who has a Samsung Galaxy 7 and you want them to check it, have them check it too. So the more help that you can get to do this, the better. And it's not something that's necessary to do on every email, but it's good to every once in a while have these individuals walk through the process and make sure that they're having a good experience throughout. So questions to ask, like what was your experience like, what went wrong, and what could have been better. And I'm not just talking about from the email, like have them click from the email to the web experience and have as many people testing as possible. That way you can find any errors that might pop up. And then has your second checker reviewed both sends? Have they looked at the HTML version and the email version? Have they found any errors? If they did, have those errors been fixed? And then finally, when it comes time to send the email, it's good to sit with that second checker and go through that checklist that I was just talking about. And if you want an example of what this checklist looks like, it's here on the screen. We have the name of the email or the program, like what the distribution list is going to be, the days that we're going to send, what the subject lines are going to be. We talked about from and reply to addresses before. We include those as well. Like have we updated our data? Have we sent ourselves test emails? Are our links correct? We go through spelling. We go through that logical thought sequence that we talked about. We're double checking phone numbers and dates and promo codes. We're reading our text for any spelling errors. We're checking, make sure our footer information and our terms and conditions are correct. And what I would encourage you to do, and like we're going to make these slides available, but like you feel free to use our checklist, but I would encourage you to make your own checklist for things that are important to you and your company. So here as we wrap up, going through our 6 steps, define the goal. What are you trying to accomplish? Gather requirements. Do you know what's needed for these campaigns and you have all that information up front? My personal favorite step, take a step back and how do you take this campaign from good to excellent? And that's something to do before you even design or build anything. And then your design, is it attention grabbing? Like does it follow that 2-second rule? Like if someone looks at it for 2 seconds, are they going to be engaged in your email? Build, did you build an email that works well for everyone? and then testing. Did you find anything wrong? And if you did you fix it? And did you go through an extensive QC process? So before we go, and let's see, we've got about 4 minutes left, and I hope you'll stick with us. We've got a couple of questions here from the audience. And Tiffany, feel free to jump in on any of these. So we got a question from Steven. I'm new to IBM Marketing Cloud and have gone through onboarding. Is some of this available to me in the training for using personalization and automation? So having been through that training, there is training on it. There is, like, it walks you through all of the tools that are available in IBM Marketing Cloud for personalization and the training on programs themselves. That's a really good and extensive training. I would say that if you're trying to go beyond what's in the training, to use relational table content and live content, some of that requires you going on the IBM knowledge base or doing a little bit of searching for yourself. But generally speaking, the training is very good, and it provides you like the basic fundamentals for including that type of personalization and automation in your emails. So next question we have here is from Justin. What sort of sign-off tools do you find suitable for the email process? So, I mean, this may sound antiquated, but here at Whereoware, our sign-off tools are basically like printing off a physical checklist and having two people with pens actually go through that checklist and mark off that everything's been done. I've heard of a lot of different processes. Some people like Trello. Trello is really good, and then that's a task management tool. Some folks use Basecamp as a project management tool. We here at Whereoware, we also use Clarizen to manage our tasks and for project management. Those are all good tools. It's basically what works best for you. Some people just go back and forth on email to make sure all of these things get done. I'm not sure that's the best one. The sign-off tool with the checklist works really well for us, but I can acknowledge that might not be the best tool for everybody. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed today's content. We're going to go ahead and share after this the recording of the webinar and all of our slides at www.whereoware.com/blog. And we're also going to be sharing the 6-step checklist that summarizes the principles we talked about today, so you can use that whenever you send your emails. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.